This
All righty.
conference will now be recorded.
Always happens. Good afternoon, everyone. I see that everybody's enjoying their lunch. I know Megan's going to have a captive audience, right? No questions, just listening. No, thank you so much. We're very excited on behalf of our our president, Mayor Hernandez, our executive committee members, and our LRGVDC entire board members. Always welcome state, federal, local officials, funding agencies to come by and present to our local governments on the various opportunities they have for funding availability for our local governments. Um, and also want to thank the Texas Broadband Development Office. We have Ms. Megan Froh. She is the Assistant Director to the Texas Broadband Development Office, who will be presenting on broadband. I would assume, right? Um, and so we do. Well, actually, I do. I'm going to get the first dibs on this, but I do have after your presentation, Megan, two questions that I know some of the board members that could not attend have reached out to me uh, and would like for me to ask two questions on their behalf that I will be presenting at our next August board meeting. And so, if you can indulge me afterwards, I would appreciate that. And so now,
Absolutely.
without further ado, I have Megan Froh on the line. Megan, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I am Megan Froh. I am the outreach coordinator for the Texas Broadband Development Office. So what I'm going to do today, I know that y'all are all eating and this is entertainment. So I'm going to try and make this as high level, give you some overview of what our office is doing, what funding is coming, and then I want to leave enough time that everybody can ask questions at the end. So I'm going to turn my camera off and get right into the presentation, but let me know if you've got any questions. Okay, and I assume that everybody can see my screen. Is that correct?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm seeing some nodding. So I'm going to go into what exactly is broadband. A lot of people have questions about that. Is it internet? What is it? Is it the same thing? And broadband is actually high-speed internet. And the FCC, or the Federal Communication Commission, defines high-speed internet as 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. Now you're going to see I have that date 2015 out to the side there. That is a very outdated definition. We're expecting them to update that very soon, and any funding that is going to go out through the Broadband Development Office, those projects need to be future-proofing our speeds. So we are looking at targets of 100 over 20, or you're going to hear it 100 over 100 symmetrical. Oftentimes it's referred to as symmetrical speeds, and that refers to the download and the upload speeds. So 25 over 3 is the bare bones minimum consideration for broadband. So our office is working to close the digital divide in Texas. We know that nearly 8 million Texans in 3 million households do not have broadband. And when I say that, we need to look back at that definition. That means they do not even have 25 over 3 service. And oftentimes, and we can all kind of think back to that old dial-up, maybe that AOL tone, we're talking about internet that creeps, that they cannot click through pages. They could not be streaming a meeting like we're doing today. Netflix is certainly off the table. So when you think about that, there's a lot of people out there that don't even have the bare minimum broadband speeds, and they are paying through the roof for not even broadband. So just to kind of put that in perspective for everybody. Now we know a huge problem is infrastructure, right? So we have a lot of rural areas that just do not have the infrastructure, whether that be fiber or opportunities for fixed wireless, maybe not even satellite. The infrastructure just does not exist, but it's not the only problem. There are a lot of moving parts when we look at the digital divide, and some of that can be affordability. We have certainly heard from people that have fiber directly to their home, but they can't access it because they cannot afford it. So we are going to be looking at targeting, the affordability aspect. Another problem is access to devices. So maybe there is internet, but they do not have a device that can connect. And then digital literacy. They may not have the skills that it takes to connect, to do these searches, to apply for jobs online. And so we really need to keep that in mind and put digital literacy, digital equity, as well as infrastructure at the forefront of our brains when we start thinking about the digital divide. Now, broadband affects a lot of different things, and some people are not aware of all the different things that it can affect. And certainly I am preaching to the choir here when I say enhanced economic development. So we know that there may be a community that businesses or residents are not looking to move to because of the lack of broadband. It takes broadband to run a business. It takes broadband to be able to work from home, to be able to do school from home, should the need arise again. Speaking on that, education. We all learned in the pandemic that there is a need for connectivity for our students. Comptroller Hager is very passionate about broadband. We are fortunate to be housed within the comptroller's office. And he heard stories from families of students having to go to libraries in terrible weather, early morning, and they are all leaned up against the building trying to turn in their homework. Or the stories of children being at McDonald's because there's free Wi-Fi trying to do homework. That's just not acceptable. So we know that education plays a huge part in this. But there's also disaster resilience and emergency management. If infrastructure is wiped out, if connectivity doesn't exist, in an emergency, those folks cannot reach out for help. We also heard stories on our listening tour from the coast. Hurricane came through, what little infrastructure there was wiped out, and they had to wait for that storm to pass, go to the tallest building in town to try to connect out for emergency help. That's a scary thing when you think about it. We all kind of take for granted that we can access the internet right there on our phone. Not everybody has that luxury. So we also know that we need enhanced healthcare. This was certainly something that was happening pre-pandemic, but the pandemic really brought it to light that telemedicine is sort of the way of the future. Not only for small communities that maybe don't have the medical resources at hand, and so those citizens need to be able to call out and talk to doctors outside of their area, maybe for specialists. Otherwise, the drive would not be an affordable way to see that specialist. But if you can use broadband and connect right there in your home to a specialist or to your doctor, that is hugely important. So our office was created just this past September of 2021 by House Bill 5. We have, certainly several milestones just for House Bill 5, but also for the federal funding that's coming down. One of those being that we need to create a state broadband plan. And I am happy to announce that we completed that this past month. It was published on June 15th. You can find that, and I will discuss this a little bit further in a minute, on our website, broadbandfortexas.com. You can access the PDF. We have some kind of quick reference guides that you can see. But that plan is going to be our guiding star as we move forward. It is just an initial plan. It's going to be an evolving document. As we learn more, it will be updated. But we were happy to meet that milestone. We're working to secure federal and state funding to close the digital divide. We are working to develop a competitive financial incentive program, and our goal is for the first grant program to be up and running in October. I'll speak on that a little bit more further in the presentation. And also to establish a statewide availability map. That map is due legislatively mandated by January of 2023. We are hiring a consultant to assist us with that, but we're looking at a granular level, address level, broadband availability map. And it's going to be important not only for Texans, for our office, for us to know who's unserved, who's underserved, but when it comes to the federal funding, the feds are going to be relying on the FCC maps, which are soon to be updated, but there will be a protest period. And so we can, if we have our own Texas-wide map, we can use our information to protest the FCC map and make sure that we have accurate information for our state. We're conducting outreach and digital literacy programs, and we are also making recommendations to state legislators. They are looking to us to see what the needs are, and we are going to be updating them as we find out more information from citizens. So to speak, this is going to be high level, and I promise you I'll get into a few more details, and I will allow all the questions you have on this, because I know this is an important topic. But when it comes to the funding that is going to be coming through our office, there's several different buckets of funding. One being the American Rescue Plan Act. You're going to hear that referred to as ARPA. The Coronavirus Capital Projects Funds, you'll hear that called CPF funds. And then the other bucket is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so that is going to be for broadband equity, access, and deployment. Digital equity, like I spoke on a few minutes ago, is going to be a huge portion of that, and the affordability aspect as well. We do have some state revenue that was allocated for our office as well. So when we talk about the CPF funds, and that's coming from the U.S. Treasury, Texas was allocated $500.5 million. This is going to be predominantly used for last mile connectivity. And some of you may know what that means, others may not. So when you think of last mile, I want you to think of middle mile. And middle mile is that main tranche, let's say, of fiber that brings the connectivity to an area. The last mile is the connectivity from that main middle mile to the residence or to the business. So it's that last tree branch that actually gets the connectivity to benefit the community. So we are looking at 100 upload and 100 downloads. That's megabits per second. That's symmetrical that I spoke on earlier. We want to future-proof this funding. So we are not going to fund something that's going to bring someone only up to the bare minimum. That old FCC definition of 25/3, we're going to be looking at 100/100. There is not an unserved or underserved requirement like there is with some of the other federal funding, but the time clock on this has already started ticking. So those funds have got to be spent by 2026. So the first grant program that we're going to have up and running, and like I said, we're shooting for October, that's going to be for these CPF dollars, the 500.5, and it's going to be primarily for last mile connectivity. The other bucket of money is the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act. It's IIJA. That's coming from the NTIA. We do not yet know how much Texas is going to receive. We know that every single state is going to receive at minimum $100 million. By our calculations, we are estimating that Texas is going to receive anywhere from $1 to $3 billion for broadband through this IIJA. It's a formula-based amount, and they have not released that full amount yet. So we are working right now to meet some guidelines for the NTIA so that we can draw down those funds. These funds are likely not going to be available to the communities, to the counties until 2024. Because of all of the stipulations that the states have to meet to draw down those funds. We do have to submit a 5-year plan. We're going to have a lot of local government coordination, but it's going to be a few years before that funding is going to come out the door. Now, this is something when I talk to communities about being shovel ready, being prepared for the funding that's coming, 2 years is going to fly by. And this is the big bucket of money. The issue here, and not issue, but the way that the federal guidelines lay it out, there's a cascading effect that has to happen. So we have to first address those in unserved areas. And when I say unserved, that's going to be anybody that falls below 25/3 on that minimum definition of broadband. So if you fall below that, you're considered unserved. So we have to address all areas that are unserved before we can then move into underserved. Now, underserved communities are going to be anyone under 100/20 megabits per second. If there is funding left over, we can then move on to address community anchor institutions. That's going to be your libraries, your hospitals, your schools, and that's with this specific funding. So we are looking at FCC maps. We know that those are outdated. The FCC knows they're outdated. They are expecting to update those maps this summer. I have not yet seen them, so fingers crossed that those are coming out soon. But they are going to be using those maps to determine who is unserved, who is underserved. And so to go back to the Texas broadband availability map that we're going to publish, we're going to use that map to ensure that the FCC map has it right for Texas. So they're going to be using the FCC maps. We're going to use our map to make sure they're right. So as part of the IIJA, there's also a digital equity component. So that's $2.75 billion nationwide to specifically address the digital equity, whether that's affordability, literacy, or devices. So the criteria for reliable broadband service as it pertains to the federal guidelines, they are leaning very heavily in favoring fiber. Now, our office is technology agnostic. House Bill 5 wrote that in, that we look at all service types. Comptroller Hager has made this a point of contention with NTIA. He wants them to know that that's limiting, and why are we putting up additional barriers to connectivity? Texas is a state unlike any other. There are areas that we may not be able to reach with fiber, and we do not want a community to be ineligible for funding based on the lack of possibility of getting fiber there. So many of you may have seen a letter that was written discussing this. We're hopeful that NTIA is going to adjust those guidelines for us, but at this point, they are favoring fiber. Fixed wireless is also an option, but something to keep in mind, and this comes up a lot. A lot of people have questions about satellite or Starlink, or is that a way that we can service all of Texas by just satellite service? So the federal guidelines are saying that if an area is exclusively served by satellite, regardless of the speed, they are considering it unserved. Now, we believe that may be because satellite is perhaps not always reliable. There's things that can interfere with satellites. You may not be able to get the speeds that you can get with fiber. But when it comes to that cascading effect, I want everybody to remember, an unserved area is anybody that is 25/3 below that threshold. So let's say a community has 100/100 symmetrical, which is fantastic, but it's by satellite exclusively. They are going to be in the same category as those that have zero connectivity at all, not even with satellite. So they're considered unserved. So that's something to keep in mind. When it comes to our office specifically, we were allocated 5 full-time employees. So that includes our director, Greg Conti, and 4 additional employees. So at our max capacity, we're looking at 5. We are very, very grateful that Comptroller Hager petitioned to have the Broadband Development Office go within his office. He has wonderful resources. We're able to leverage other departments, other employees, and we're in a great spot. So a lot of people think, oh no, that's only 5 people. How are you going to get it done? We actually have the backing of the comptroller's office. And so we've hit the ground running. Everyone is in support of this succeeding. We also have a board of advisors. Comptroller Hager is the chairman of that board, and we take their input very seriously when it comes to all things broadband. There is also a Governor's Broadband Development Council. Now, this was formed in 2019. This was pre-pandemic. This was prior to any of this federal funding coming down or our office being created. So they have 21 board members, and they develop an annual report, which we will also be incorporating, in our guidance. So when it comes to broadband planning, and I will let everyone know, we just recently updated on our website at broadbandfortexas.com. We have a community toolkit. It is ever evolving. And so for communities that don't know how to get started, they know this funding is coming, but what do we do? That is a great resource, and I highly recommend that each of you check out the site, go to that toolkit. We've got some best practices. We have suggestions on how to get started all the way through to when this funding is going to come out. We are still working on that application process, so I'll preemptively tell you I don't have very many answers for you when it comes to what's going to be on that application, what are those guidelines going to be. But what we always recommend to communities is to engage the stakeholders. Who is going to be affected by this connectivity? Assemble a broadband team, and that may be one person in a community. I will call that the broadband champion. You have to have somebody who knows how important this is and will vouch for a community or vouch for that county and say, okay, what do we need to do? Identify the priorities. So I always say it's very important for a community to know what's going on within the community. Who better to know than you? And so you need to do some asset inventory. You need to know where that dark fiber may be. Where's the closest middle mile that you need to connect to for that last mile connectivity? If there's a tall water tower in town, we need to know who has rights to that, who can put a wireless antenna there. Is that possible? Can we break down some of the barriers to getting that done? Because you can use that as a huge asset. Harness all of that data. You need to consider digital inclusion. So are there people in town that do have connectivity, but maybe for one or another reason are not connecting? And then engage the providers. You need to know who are the internet service providers, and you're going to hear that called ISP. When you hear ISP, that's internet service providers. Figure out how many internet service providers are in your area. These are people that you're going to need to work with to get these projects done. And with the largest bucket of funding, and we have a few years before that grant program is going to be open for applications. But it's important between now and then that you talk to these providers, that you assess the area, figure out what it's going to cost to get those who need connectivity connected, so that you'll know how to apply, how much to apply for, what project is going to be done, how many households or businesses will be served. And it's very important to gather all of that information and to be prepared so that when that application is open, you can submit an application successfully. It will be a competitive grant program. There will be internet service providers who apply, perhaps on behalf of a county or a community, and vice versa. It may be that a community is applying for funding and they've partnered with an internet service provider as a sub-grantee to do that work. Another thing to keep in mind, and this is just kind of a caveat here, both the CPF funds, the capital project funds, and the IIJA funds are considered taxable income. We are working diligently to try and break down that barrier, but at this point, that's what the federal guidelines have laid out. And with the IIJA funds, there's a 25% match. Now, Comptroller Hager has been pushing hard for our legislators to consider doing a state match for that, but it's yet to be seen if in the next session that they will go through with that. So it's something to keep in mind when you start thinking about project cost, who's going to do the work. Please keep in mind that taxable aspect as well as a 25% match for the IIJA. Now, the first tranche of funds that are coming, the CPF, does not have a 25% match. So I'm just going to throw my information out here. Please write down my email. Our website is broadbandfortexas.com. You're going to see that in sort of that gray print at the bottom of the screen. Our website is updated very frequently. In fact, I work on that near weekly. As we get a little bit more information, I'm going to throw it on the website. The community toolkit can be found there. You can find more information on our funding. We have an excellent infographic that our communications team put together specifically to help outline all of these funds, to make it a little more palatable, to understand where the money's coming from and what it can be used for. And we have it in a PDF format as well. So you can access that, you can print it out, hang on to it. But yeah, everything that you need to know when it comes to broadband in Texas, the best resource is going to be broadbandfortexas.com. I am always available. My main priority in my position is to assess the needs of communities and to connect them with the resources that we know, so that you can successfully apply for this funding and we can close the digital divide in Texas. So I know you probably all have a lot of questions, and so I wanted to make this kind of short and sweet so that we could really address your questions. So please fire away.
Hey, Megan, this is Rick Barrera, Lower Oregon Development Council. We've got, I'm sure, several questions, and I'll be running around with a mic, but as my executive director mentioned a minute ago, he's got a couple of questions that he's going to go ahead and pop.
Great.
Okay, thank you, Megan, so much for that presentation. Good information. And so, like I mentioned, just wanted to ask two questions, somewhat based off of what board members have inquired on. And so, some of these questions you've already addressed in your presentation. And so, just bear with me, and it might be just that they want a clear cut of who is going to benefit from this particular funding stream. And so, how are you going to determine who you will be assisting? Is it the rural areas only, or cities, or both rural and city?
That's a great question. So it's not an easy answer, but I'm going to say everybody. It's not just a rural problem. We are also seeing issues in our urban areas. Now, when it comes to who's going to get the funding first, like I said, it's going to be a competitive grant program. With the first tranche of money, the CPF funds, we're looking at last mile connectivity. So that's leaning much more heavily to infrastructure. And as we all know, the rural areas are affected by that the most. So when the applications come in, whether it be a community or an internet service provider, we're going to be looking at where connectivity is not. The last mile is non-existent. So that's for that first bucket of money, the CPF funds. Now, when it comes to the second bucket of money, the IIJA funds, there's a lot of moving parts within that. And the cascading effect of unserved first before we can move into underserved, that's going to be anyone. So whether that's in an urban area or a rural area, anyone that falls below the 25/3, we have to address the needs of those communities everywhere before we can even consider moving on to the underserved. And so and they're looking at making that web across the entire state. Obviously, connecting those who have not had any connectivity is the first priority.
Okay, yeah, because when you mentioned the unserved and underserved, to me that tells me that those are just two of the priorities or scoring categories that you will be using. And since these are going to be competitive grants, that's what I was thinking along those lines. And being that these are going to be competitive grants, will there be a scoring mechanism, and can that scoring mechanism be available beforehand to those applicants?
Yes, it will be. And we're going to put out rules in advance of the application process actually being open. And so we're shooting for October for the actual application process to open. So between now and then, yes, you're going to see the guidelines, you're going to see the rules. We're going to have a protest period on that, as well as once people begin to apply, there's going to be a 30-day protest period on that as well. So just for an example, let's say an internet service provider applies for funding for a certain county, and we publish that on our website. And let's say that county looks on the website and they say, no, we're already served. Why are you applying for funding at this address? So there's going to be a protest period included in the application process as well.
Okay. The second question, and this, just bear with me, is somewhat might be a loaded question, but given that the recent rhetoric that's been going around most recently, I know we had a Texas Association of Regional Councils meeting on Tuesday, and this is where the discussion came up with a couple of other EDs throughout the state, COG EDs. And so we've received some information that apparently East Texas, I think Senator Robert Nichols from District 3 out of Jacksonville, Texas, East Texas, was, and I don't know if I don't want to put words in his mouth, right, or a comment on his behalf, but the conversation that developed during our TARC web conference was that apparently there was going to be some legislation passed that would prohibit local governments to be providers. And so this is where this, I guess, the question stems from, because we do have two cities here, maybe counties even, that have taken on that initiative, which is great, because they have asked providers or have asked providers in the past whether they want to venture into a partnership due to the lack of response. Obviously there was none, and they took it upon themselves to move forward. And a city, I'm not going to mention any names, but a city developed its own broadband, became a provider, and another one is following suit as well. And so, what is the reality of the situation at the Texas Broadband Development Office as far as, who are you here to help? Is it the private provider sector, or the local governments, cities and counties, or both?
The answer to that is both. And I'll tell you, and I briefly mentioned this, that my role as outreach coordinator is to talk to communities, to discuss what's going on, to get everybody ready. Now we have to incorporate internet service providers. We have to incorporate, those organizations that are doing the work, so that that we can all be on the same page, right? So the federal funding is actually making a favorable decision on public-private partnerships. You're going to see that across the board. So it's encouraging that teamwork with a provider and a local government. That's going to receive more points on the scoring matrix. So it's important that we're all working together, and that's why I say you've got to identify who your service providers are in the area. Sometimes it may be one. We've got communities out there that don't have any. So we need to figure that out so that you can determine who you're going to partner with, who's going to be doing the work, and vice versa. We may have service providers that come in and say, I want to take care of this county and this county. Have you spoken with that county? Are they aware of your plan for their community? When you spoke on the legislation, there's a lot of communities that do not want to get into the broadband business to manage that. Now, federal guidelines are asking that states relax the requirements or the barriers to that have existed in legislation in the past. That's yet to be determined or changed to this date that I'm aware of. Now, next session, that may change based on what we know now on the federal guidelines. I don't know that. That's not in my department, but we're hoping and we're informing them of what the federal guidelines are asking for so that we can reduce any barriers to connectivity. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, of course. Now, is this funding only available to local governments and not providers? I think
No, it's gonna be open to all. So it's a competitive grant program.
even providers.
Yes.
Okay.
Anybody?
And I think that's it. And on behalf of the LRG, before I pass it on to Rick, on behalf of the
Yeah.
LRGVD, the Council of Governments, as you know, we're one of 24 throughout the state of Texas, and we're very proficient, active on trying to implement different projects for our regions. And so whatever we can do, because I know it's going to be a daunting task, and you're going to need a pretty neutral party in all this, especially to try to implement broadband. And I'm talking this, I'm coming from us implementing interoperable communication throughout this region for first responders. We spearheaded that here at the COG, so we have a vast experience in doing that, and that is because you mentioned the towers available and so forth. We know where all those are, and so whatever we can do to ease the workload or the burden to our local jurisdictions, counties, we'll be happy to step up to the plate and work with you all to try to implement these projects. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. It is going to take teamwork and partnership across the board. We know that. I think a lot of communities know that. Service providers even are knowing that and aware. It's a really unique opportunity that we find ourselves in, that we have such support to see this succeed. Everybody needs broadband, and I have yet to talk to a community that said, no, broadband, we don't want that here, right? So everybody's looking to find ways to make this work, to cut down those barriers. And so I am very appreciative. I actually have in my future plans, very short-term plans here to begin to make community outreach, to have meetings just like this on a regional level on a monthly basis, so that we can begin to incorporate the exact needs as people and communities begin to assess the needs in their area. We hold monthly internet service provider roundtables currently. And so my goal is to be able to talk to communities on this regional level and take that back to service providers and vice versa, what we hear from internet service providers, and talk to communities so that it can begin to break down those barriers and needs can be met.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. I'll echo Manuel's comments. We're here to help. Just let us know how we can help bridge some of those gaps. Like I said, we're the regional council of governments. That's why we're here. That's the purpose we serve, is to serve the region. And if we can help in any regards, we will. I'll open up to other questions right now. I know Mayor Combs, if you want to introduce yourself and your question, sir.
My name is Marco Sanchez. I'm the mayor of Combs. And the only question I had was, how can we not duplicate efforts? Maybe the COG can lead, and if the county is going to take this ETJ or this city limit or the county city limit, that way we get our applications ready by October so we can apply. It's going to be competitive, and the other COGs are going to compete too. I just want to be there, But you're the COG.
That's an excellent question. Excellent question. I am continually talking to communities, and it may be, I'm talking a city and a county. They'll come to me with a plan, and I've asked, have you talked on a county level? Have you talked to your COG? I really, and our office is really pushing for that regional support and that county-wide assessment for just that, so that we're not duplicating and that we can make the funds stretch and be efficient with them. I always talk about it as the Costco effect, right? The more you're buying, the lower the mile of fiber. So if you have two communities sitting right next to each other that will work together, and when you talk to an internet service provider, you say you're gonna serve this entire county or this region, of the county, or even on a larger scale regionally, that's going to be more appealing to the industry to come in, dig once all the way down, however we're going to make that middle mile and last mile connectivity. So within our application process, and like I said, we don't have all the guidelines, we don't have the matrix set in stone just yet. We're going to be looking at that. So a larger scale, making sure that we do have and can encompass larger portions of an area. What I don't want to see, and I know that no one wants to see it, is a project that's right here and right next door, nothing is happening. So when they eventually do put in last mile or do the project, we're going to have that gap right between the communities that perhaps people are going to be left out that didn't get served by either last mile project. And so we do want to avoid that. I think it's really important to look a little larger scale and make those connections, make those partnerships. If you're a community and you've not been talking to your county, we need to be looking countywide. Who's the broadband champion in these different areas? They all need to come together and at least have a meeting about what the project needs to look like large scale.
All righty, thank you. Anybody else have any other questions?
Megan, a follow-up question with the mayor is, our council of governments, would they be eligible to apply on behalf of counties or cities or the region?
Yes, yes.
One more question.
Sure.
There was
Y'all fire away. I'm happy. I'm happy to answer whatever you've got.
good. Hey, well, when the Affordable Act money came out, there were some bigger cities like Brownsville that decided to use some of their money for infrastructure and internet, and Valley Baptist was in there, I think. So are they still going forward with their projects, and they're not going to interfere with our October 31st for the smaller cities for our application?
Well, that's totally separate funding. So the funding that's going to be available in October is the CPF funds, that 500.5 million allocated to Texas. Now there is some question, a lot of questions have been raised with the RDOF funds, if that's what you're referring to, that were previously applied for, and maybe a service provider has not done the work in that area. That we are pursuing with NTIA and Treasury to determine those guidelines and how we're going to identify those areas that maybe did apply for funding, but a project's not being done for one reason or another, and how they're placed in that matrix. So that's still a little bit yet to be determined if that's the funding that you're discussing. There is a way that someone who, let's say, has already started a broadband project can then apply for these funds to continue the project, but it can be backdated. And so that is something that our office is looking at as well. There is a guideline on a cutoff date for that, for a reimbursement. So we're considering that as well. We know that some projects began before our office was formed, and they may be applying for funding to continue those projects.
So Megan, I guess the question really comes down to is will there be, frankly, let me just cut to the chase, is there going to be kind of double dipping involved or allowed? Because somebody may be applying for something for CIA and then they're going to apply for them. So that's one of that's really the basis of it.
And that's something that we're still working on with that matrix, the guidelines, how to avoid that. Right. And so when we start looking at that application process, the questions that are going to be asked, address level, census block, trying to avoid that specifically.
Okay. All righty. Does anybody else have any other questions?
In the rural areas, being that you said that anybody that's being served by satellite is considered not being served. So as a entity or a county applies for broadband funding, will they be required to ensure that they serve even that one household that's 25 miles away by itself?
Yes, we want to make sure that everyone is being connected. So trying to think of a good example for that. If a community, it doesn't matter how many, I guess is what I'm saying. Let's say a community applies, we have 20 residents and they're not served, and they're far stretched. We're talking about farms and ranches. We've talked to a lot of agricultural, industry folks, and there's equipment out there that needs broadband to run. just like our smart enabled toasters now. There's farm equipment. So that may be 10 miles outside of town. It may be one farm or ranch. And so trying to make sure that we're picking up everybody in that county. So when it comes to that unserved or underserved cascading effect with the IIJA fund specifically, we're going to have to make sure, and we have mapping specialists on this, trying to determine, where those unserved areas are to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind.
A question from Mr. Raul, Cameron County Economic Development.
Two silly questions. First, can you define 25 over
25 over 3.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's one question. And the other one is you made reference that we go and do research who are the ISP providers. Doesn't the state has, don't you have that information already by region or cities so we can start researching?
That second question, you cut out a few times. I'm not sure what the end of the question was.
He's wondering if the state has information on internet service providers already for any given location, zip code, city boundary, what have you.
Not in all cases. So we are depending a lot on communities to let us know that information. Certainly the FCC has always required internet service providers to submit their data, and that's how they build their maps. Now, those are not always accurate, right? Trying to keep everybody honest, what area is actually being served and by what provider. Some of that has been a mystery, an ongoing mystery. Now, I'll tell you, we're working with the industry folks. They know to receive federal funding from our office, they're going to have to supply us with accurate information as we build our Texas broadband availability map. So once we actually get further in that process, then yes, we're going to be able to begin determining exactly what providers are in what area. But I don't have a database to tell you, these are the service providers in this area that fully encompass it. Now, you can find through the ACP certain providers that are participating in the ACP program, but that doesn't encompass every county and every provider in that county, just who has subscribed for that plan. So I think it's really important that the community know what's going on in the community, and we as the state will depend on the communities for that. It has been something that we've talked about a lot. We don't want the Broadband Development Office for the state to be coming in and saying, this is how we're doing it, this is your service provider. We want to listen and we want to take into account what's happening in a community. And we don't necessarily know that by what's been reported in the past. So we want today's information and what you're really experiencing. And when I say talk to internet service providers or do speed tests to determine who's unserved in your area or underserved even, sometimes it takes a survey or phone calls to say, what speed are you really receiving? And do a speed test right now to let me know. Not only for the citizens to know that they are actually getting what they're paying for, but to know if a provider just says, yes, that area of the county is served, are they? Is that true? And it's up to the communities, maybe countywide, maybe community-wide, to fact check that and make sure that's accurate.
Megan, what does ACP mean? You mentioned ACP, there's carriers.
Yes, sorry. The Affordable Connectivity Program. And so the
Okay.
Biden administration has pushed the ACP program. It's people are eligible to receive a discount on devices and broadband subscriptions through certain providers. There are stipulations and guidelines to who qualifies for that, but there are a large number of providers who have subscribed to that program and are offering a low-cost program through the ACP, so that if someone qualifies for the ACP, it technically would mean they're getting free internet. And so that's something certainly to keep in mind and look into. We also have information about the ACP on our website, broadbandfortexas.com, for those people who are interested to see if you are eligible or those folks in your community may be eligible.
Okay. Oh yeah. Well, could you clarify 25/3, Megan? There's some here who aren't familiar with that terminology.
Yes, yeah. So 25/3, and when I say 25/3, it's 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. So when you think about that, think about accessing a website. That's going to be your download speed. When you want to send something out, like an email or this streaming service to do this meeting right now, what we're sending out is 3 upload. Now that is the minimum defined. That's the definition by the FCC is the minimum to be considered to have broadband service is 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload.
All right, any more questions? Now, Megan, I'm going to ask this question and I'll close it out with this. You mentioned the survey and being reliant on the communities to provide the input. So and I'm assuming you've closed the RFP or RFQ for whoever the consultant is that's going to help you develop this map. Am I correct? Or is it still open?
Yes, the RFO went out, the solicitation period is closed, and we're hoping to be able to make that announcement at the end of this month or earliest next month.
Okay, so how much of that information, this consultant you hired, how much of the data that they're going to provide you, how much of that is dependent on survey that they send out to the communities here?
I don't have that information yet. I do not have the scope of work on the specifics of how they'll be gathering that information. I know that they're going to work with service providers and the requirement that service providers accurately report the information that we request for them to be eligible for funding through our office. So as far as the specifics, now I know that they will be contacting communities. I will be working with communities in conjunction with that. But there's quite the initiative, and I until that has been made more public and goes through our legal team, I can't speak too much on that process. I'm sorry about that, but they have been chosen, and we're hoping to have that information out very soon.
No worries. The only reason I ask because we work in a lot of different facets of community development here, and I've worked with other engineering firms who've been hired to do other kind of regional plans, and a lot of that data is very, very reliant on the communities actually providing some kind of data.
It is, and I'll tell you, Comptroller Hager spearheaded a 12-stop listening tour. I know many of you may have heard about that. We went to the 12 economic regions of Texas. His focus was listening to Texans. I was at every stop with him, and it was vital to hear the needs from the community. And we gathered a lot of information that way in developing our plan that was published in June. We had 16,000 survey respondents. We had 66 private roundtables in addition to the 12-stop listening tour. And so it's truly at the heart of what we're doing to hear from communities and know what your needs are, as opposed to just taking somebody's word for it, right? And trying to fix something in an area that may not need to be fixed, and ignoring those who may still need to be connected. So we want to find that out from the community. So we are going to be reliant on community partnership.
All right, excellent. So I say that to tell everybody here, just want to keep your eyes and ears open in case there is some kind of outreach at some point from either the broadband office or somebody representing them to develop this plan, and just to make sure you're able to provide the data that they're looking for, or at least respond with something, because as she mentioned, that they want this map to be more effective than that which is produced at the federal level, obviously. So
yes, and I will tell you, if anybody after this meeting at any point has questions, or let's say somebody contacts you, and I know we're all a little wary of, okay, is that truly, are you contacting me from the state or someone else? Reach out to me. I put my email address in that slideshow. I'm happy to send that presentation out as well. Please feel free to reach out to me and ask questions when you have them, or if you're contacted and you're not sure, I'm happy to answer any questions going forward.
awesome. Thank you, Megan. Very, very much appreciated. We really, really enjoyed having you here. Thank you so much for joining. We wish you could have been here, obviously. But,
I wish I could have too. I do. I appreciate you having me. And again, thank you so much, and reach out anytime.
No worries. And thank you. And you're welcome to stay. We've only got 1 or 2 more announcements to do before we conclude our lunch presentation. Speaking of ISPs, we have an ISP in-house. They were generous enough to provide lunch for us today, and they're welcome to approach the podium and say a few words if they'd like. Mr. Jeff Patterson, if you want to approach the podium. He's with one of the oldest telephone co-ops in South Texas, if not the state. And they've become quite instrumental in providing internet service and broadband throughout the rural South Texas.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction and for the opportunity. And I didn't know I would be speaking here today, but it seems very apropos. The VTX1 is here while the broadband office is making a presentation. So I took some notes on some of the things that have been discussed and some of the questions. VTX1, which some of you know is Valley Telephone, over the years, we started in 1952. We'll be approaching 10,000 miles of fiber in the ground. Over 300 fixed wireless towers throughout South Texas. And we're very committed to solving the digital divide, to helping economic development, because we understand that if we can get more people with internet, we can have more businesses attracted to the Valley. With those businesses could become more jobs, and high tides lift all boats, right? So we have the opportunity to help ourselves by first helping you and the communities that we serve. And so, we hear about the projects that the cities have taken on by themselves. We were participants in with both of those cities that have done this. We continue in the background to assist where we can. So we may not be the partner you choose to work with in the future, but that doesn't mean that we still will not be available to work with all of you to answer some of these questions of, how do we get involved in this grant process? What speeds do we have? What ISPs are in our community? We have the ability to come in and assist you. We service SpaceX and UTRGV and DHR, and those are all fantastic. But I think when we start looking at the communities as a whole, COVID taught us that a lot of people were really underserved, and there was a lot of unserved within our own communities. It was very eye-opening. So as from a corporate perspective, it's been our focus to work with whoever we can, economic development teams, cities, counties, councils of government, to help solve this problem. It's a complicated one, but we're very committed to doing that. So we hear that maybe some of the other ISPs are not as interested. We're very interested. This is our backyard. We're from here, and we're very interested in helping. Some of the other pieces that are important is, the grant matching. VTX1 has the ability to fund itself and provide the matching for the grants. I know some of the other ISPs are struggling with that piece. So looking for a solid financial partner, someone that has over 50 years experience in this area, we're happy to help. And feel free to reach out to us. We'll come by your office and answer any questions you have. And if it's not us, we'll help you get with the provider that will be able to solve this problem with you. Does anybody have any questions or anything that I might be able to expand on further? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. I think you'd have to go one by one, but I would say an overwhelming majority are unserved or underserved. VTX1 started off as Valley Telephone serving the rural community. And so we've provided fiber to the home to 29 communities in South Texas already, which for close to a decade, some of these cities like Raymondville have had access to 1 gig speed internet for a long time, and they're way overserved. And we're very proud of that. But there are areas that we've not gotten to. And it's cost prohibitive sometimes for one company to be able to take on that by themselves. So the plan that the state's putting together to put out is if we can partner with the cities, the communities, the people in an area, and the more people we get involved, the bigger the project becomes, the more likely we are to get money and funding to go in there and take care of that issue. Combs is small, right? By itself, maybe not will not be able to serve as many people, and maybe falls down on that list of the criteria. But if they partner with Primera and Harlingen and the rest of Cameron County, now that's a big project. A lot more people are being helped, and even if it takes multiple ISPs, multiple cities, that's something that's going to have to be brought together, and it's going to take all of us getting into a room to figure that out. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, 100%. And, in advance of the state releasing any money or the grants going out, we're already working with some of the county commissioners to look at some of those areas. Uh, we've assisted already on a couple projects, but it doesn't move as fast as we would like. But I truly believe South Texas has a more regional approach and has learned over the years that the cities individually don't have as much power as the region as a whole. And so when we continue to use that approach, we're able to accomplish a lot more. And I think this problem will be solved. It's just going to take a few years to get it done. Yeah. Just to give an idea, because I unfortunately I hear that maybe some of the ISPs aren't as interested in doing it without the funding. Over the last several years, VTX1 has spent $30 to $50 million, between $30 and $50 million per year for like the last decade, self-funding its own build out to serve the communities that we live in. It would be very helpful if we could get more help from the state and the federal government to get this done, because at that rate, it's going to take a lot longer than 5 years to get this everybody served that needs to be served.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Big round of applause for Jeff. Commissioner Cruz. I would say a big round of applause for Megan, but she had to drop off evidently. She's no longer on the meeting. With that, folks, take a stretch break. We'll reconvene back here in 5, and we'll get you in your last session. I know it's been a long day. Thank you all for being here for as long as it's the duration of the event, and we'll see you all back here in a few.